She walked into the interview room holding her papers against her chest like they were the most valuable thing she owned, because they were. The salwar kameez she was wearing had been washed so many times the color had gone somewhere between cream and dust. There was a small tear near the hem that she had tried to stitch the night before with thread that did not quite match. Her bag was the kind that had been repaired at the strap twice. Her hair was pulled back tightly in the way of someone who had done it quickly without a mirror, on a bus, early in the morning, after a long night. She stood at the door of the IAS interview panel room and looked at the board in front of her. 4 members. A long table with nameplates, water bottles that nobody had opened yet, an Indian flag in a brass stand, a sign on the wall behind them listing the values of public service in Hindi: service to the nation, public welfare, honesty, duty. She took a breath and stepped inside. The man at the center of the panel looked at her and then looked at his colleagues and then looked back at her and laughed. Not a small laugh. A full, open, pointing laugh. He stood up from his chair and pointed at her the way people point when they want a room to share in something. And 2 of the other members smiled in the way people smile when the person with authority has already decided the tone. He said, "You have come to the IAS interview dressed like this." The room outside the door had other candidates waiting. Pressed suits, polished shoes, the studied composure of people who had been preparing for this day for years and had made sure everything visible reflected that preparation. Several of them could see through the glass panel in the door. She stood in front of the interview board in her faded kameez, with her papers against her chest, and she did not look at the floor. She looked at the man who was laughing. She waited for him to finish. "Before we begin, if you believe that what a person carries inside them matters more than what they wear on the outside, please like this video, subscribe to Kindness Tales, and share this with someone who needs to believe in something real today." Her name was Priya Venkatesan. She was 26 years old, and she had been preparing for the Indian Administrative Service examination for 4 years. Not 4 years of comfortable preparation. 4 years of studying by the light of a single bulb in a 2-room house in a district 3 hours from the city, where her father drove an auto rickshaw 6 days a week, and her mother stitched blouses from home, and between the 2 of them they had decided, in the specific way that parents decide things that require everything they have, that Priya would be the one who went further. She had passed the preliminary examination on her 2nd attempt. She had passed the main examination on her 1st. She had scored in the top 40 nationally. She had taken the overnight bus to the city because the train fare was beyond the margin her family could manage this month. Not because there was no money at all, but because there was a precise amount of money, and the overnight bus cost less, and the difference was her younger brother's school fees, and that calculation was not difficult. She had arrived at the city bus terminal at 5 in the morning and had gone to the public bathroom to wash her face and change into the clothes. She had brought in her bag the best clothes she owned, which were the clothes she was wearing now. She had eaten a vada pav from a stall outside the terminal and had checked her papers 3 times and had taken the local train to the interview center and had sat in the waiting area among candidates in suits and blazers and had not looked at them, and they had mostly not looked at her in the morning, had passed in the particular silence of people waiting for something that will determine a large portion of their future. She had walked into the room. The man had laughed. She waited for him to finish. Then the chairperson of the panel, a woman named Dr. Shalini Rao, who had been conducting IAS interviews for 11 years, said, "Please sit down." Her voice was level. She did not look at her colleague. She looked at Priya. Priya sat. Dr. Rao said, "Your score on the written examination was exceptional, rank 38 nationally." "Can you tell us how you prepared?" Priya said. "I studied from 6 in the morning to 11 at night for the past 4 years. I used library books when I could access them, and borrowed notes from candidates in the city through an online group when I could not. I had no coaching institute. I had a list of previous year's papers, which I worked through systematically, and a notebook where I tracked every concept I did not understand the first time and returned to it, until I did." The panel was quiet. The man who had laughed said, "And your clothing today. You did not think to present yourself more appropriately for a panel of this importance. She looked at him. She said, "May I answer that question fully?" He gestured with his hand. She said, "I took the overnight bus from my district because the train fare was the difference between coming here and my brother attending school this month. I arrived at 5 this morning. These are the best clothes I own. I pressed them last night with an iron that belongs to our neighbor because we do not have one. The tear in the hem I stitched myself. I apologize that they do not meet the standard you expected. I did not have a different standard available to me." The room was completely still. She said, "I want to be an IAS officer because I come from a place where the difference between a good officer and a poor one is visible in people's daily lives in ways that people in this room may not encounter personally. I have seen what happens when public distribution systems function and when they do not. I have seen what a good road means to an auto rickshaw driver. I have seen what a single teacher in a government school can do for 30 children when that teacher is supported, and what happens to those children when the teacher is not. I do not need to imagine the communities I want to serve. I grew up in them." She paused. She said, "I am not here because I could afford to be here. I am here because I could not afford not to be. A kindness." Tale before we continue, Kindness Tales wants you to know what brought Priya to that chair. Because the preparation and the score and the overnight bus were the visible parts. The invisible parts were the people who made them possible. There was a librarian named Mr. Subramaniam, who ran the district public library and who had noticed Priya coming in every morning at opening time for 3 years. He had started reserving the table by the window for her without being asked because it had the best light. He had ordered 3 books she had requested that the library did not hold, using the annual acquisition budget in a way that required a small creative interpretation of the guidelines, and had told nobody because it was not worth the conversation. He had given her a key to the reading room door once during a power cut so she could study in the afternoon when the main hall was too dark, and had quietly not asked for it back for 6 months. He had never once asked her what she was studying for. He had simply made the conditions for studying slightly better every time he could. There was a woman named Anita who ran the online study group for rural IAS aspirants and who had been sending scanned notes and solved papers to candidates across 7 states for 2 years from her own phone data because the group had no budget and she did not. Consider that a reason to stop. Priya had downloaded hundreds of documents from Anita. She had never met her. Anita did not know Priya's name specifically. She just knew the group had members, and the members needed material, and she had material, and the calculation ended there. There was a teacher from Priya's school named Mrs. Kamala who had written in Priya's final year report, in the remarks column where teachers wrote standard things, something that was not standard. She had written, "This student will go further than this school can take her. Make sure she knows it." Priya's mother had kept that report card. Priya had read that line so many times the paper had softened at the fold. These were the people in that interview room with Priya. Invisibly, in the way that everyone who has ever believed in you accompanies you into the rooms that matter. Dr. Rao looked at the panel. The man who had laughed had sat down during Priya's answer. He had not said anything more. His face had done something during the answer that faces do when an argument you were not expecting arrives and restructures something you thought was settled. Dr. Rao said, "I have a question," Priya said. "Yes, madam." Dr. Rao said, "If you are selected and posted to a district, what is the first thing you would do?" Priya said. "I would spend the first 30 days listening, not announcing, not restructuring, listening. I would visit the public distribution centers and the schools and the primary health posts and the panchayat offices. And I would ask the people who work there what is working and what is not, and I would ask them why they think so, and I would write it down and I would take it seriously. Because the people who have been doing this work every day know more about what needs to change than any plan written from a distance." Dr. Rao wrote something in her notes. The third panel member, a retired IAS officer named Mr. Krishnamurthy, who had said nothing until this point, said, "You spoke about your father driving an auto rickshaw. What did you learn from him about public service?" Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, He carries strangers from one place to another, and he never asks where they are going before he agrees to take them. He told me once that his job is to get people where they need to be, not to decide whether they deserve to get there. I think that is the whole of public service, actually. Not to decide who deserves the road, just to make sure the road is there and working, and that everyone who needs to travel it can. Mr. Krishnamurthy looked at his hands. Dr. Rao looked at the flag and the brass. Stand. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then Dr. Rao said, "Thank you. We will inform you of the result through the standard process." Priya stood. She picked up her papers. She thanked the panel. She walked to the door. At the door she turned, not because she had planned to, but because something needed to be said, and she was the only one in the room who could say it. She said, "The sign on your wall behind you, service to the nation, public welfare, honesty, duty. Those words were there before I came in, and they will be there after I leave. I would ask that the next candidate who walks through that door, wearing whatever they were able to wear, is measured against those words, and not against anything else." She left. The corridor outside was full of candidates in pressed suits who had heard everything through the glass panel in the door. No one said anything. A few of them looked at their shoes. One young man in a blazer that had taken his family 3 months to save for looked at the door she had walked through, and then looked at his own hands for a long time. The results were announced 6 weeks later. Priya Venkatesan, rank 38, selected. Her father was at the auto rickshaw stand when she called him. She heard the engine cut and then silence, and then a sound she had never heard her father make in her entire life, a sound that had no name, that sat somewhere between relief and joy, and the specific emotion of a person who gave everything they had toward something and has just learned it was enough. Her mother was stitching when she heard. She put the cloth down and did not pick it up again for the rest of the day, which was the only time in Priya's memory that had ever happened. Mr. Subramaniam heard about it from a notice in the district newspaper. He cut it out and pinned it to the library notice board without any announcement. People found it during the day and stopped and read it. Anita heard about it from the study group. Someone posted the result with a note that said one of ours. She did not know which one. She did not need to. Mrs. Kamala heard about it from a former student who had seen the news. She sat with it for a while. Then she got out her red pen and wrote in the margin of the paper she was marking that evening, the way she did when she wanted to remember something. She wrote. She went. The man who had laughed sent no message and made no acknowledgement. But 3 months after Priya's selection, Dr. Rao submitted a formal recommendation to the panel authority that interview conduct guidelines be reviewed, specifically the section on candidate presentation and the standards applied to it. The recommendation noted that appearance-based assumptions in the selection of public servants created a systemic barrier that worked directly against the populations those servants were meant to serve. The recommendation was accepted. The guidelines were revised. Priya did not know about this for 2 years. When someone mentioned it at a training, and she asked where it had come from and traced it back to Dr. Rao and sent her a letter, Dr. Rao wrote back. She said, "You did not need me to change the guideline. You already answered the question the guideline should have been asking. I just made sure the room caught up." Priya kept the letter. She kept Mrs. Kamala's report card. She kept the note about her father's auto rickshaw in the notebook where she had tracked every concept she did not understand and returned to until she did. She was posted to a district 3 months after completing her training. On her first day, she spent 4 hours in the office reading files. On her second day, she went to the primary health post and asked the nurse in charge what was working and what was not. The nurse looked at her for a moment, with the careful assessment of someone who has been asked that question before by people who did not listen to the answer. Then she started talking. Priya wrote it all down. She took it seriously. She went back the following week and the week after that. Never judge what a person is carrying by the condition of the bag they are carrying it in. Never measure someone's preparation by the cost of their clothes. Never mistake the distance a person has traveled to reach the room for lack of readiness to be in it, because sometimes the person who slept on a bus and pressed their best clothes with a borrowed iron and stitched the hem by hand the night before, is the most prepared person in the building. They just had to work harder to get through the door. If this story stayed with you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs it today. Subscribe to Kindness Tales for more stories of quiet courage, dignity, and the people who walk into difficult rooms. And do not look at the floor, because the rooms that matter most are the ones that try to send you away before you have said anything. And the people who stay anyway are the ones who change what those rooms become. Welcome to Kindness Tales. We are so glad you are here.